Hey guys, I'm Steve Reichert, adventure photographer and filmmaker, and I am live streaming tonight because I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the Fuji X-E3, which I've been shooting with recently. Got some initial impressions together that I would like to talk to you guys about. And I would also like to take questions and just do some general photography Q&A, and that's typically what I do on these live streams. The Adventure Photo Show is the vlog that I do here on a fairly consistent basis, and it's all about having fun with the camera, telling our stories, taking photos, and kind of going from A to B, getting better at the craft of storytelling with the camera, a little bit of video, a little bit of stills, and personally, most of what I do with the camera has a lot to do with being portable and being outside, climbing, and being adventurous, more or less. So the pursuit of a perfect camera is something that has kind of brought me into the world of YouTube, initially as a consumer, and then as I decided to share some of my own experience with you guys here, just sharing some of my videos as I got the Fuji X-T2 about a year ago, almost exactly, and that has kind of gone through a few different phases between the X100T, X100F, and then now I have the X Pro 1, the X-E3, and yeah, so like I like Fuji cameras and I like to talk about them, answer questions, and also just general photography stuff. But right now, being in school, I am doing some pre-nursing work as I changed careers fairly recently, and those of you who watch these live streams a bunch, you probably are very tired of hearing this, and I apologize, but for those of you who don't know me, I fairly recently shifted into a career of nursing, away from photography and filmmaking as my main staple for income, and so these live streams are becoming a little bit more frequent for me, and I enjoy them as an opportunity to be able to interact with you all and answer some questions and talk about things that I have going on with minimal editing, as my time is limited in that department. So anyways, got the X-E3, and I've been shooting with it over the weekend. My wife and daughter came out to visit because they live across the way, about 3 hours away, so on weekends I get to spend a little time with them and visit, and so figured that would be a nice opportunity to play with this camera. And so I would love to hear any questions that you guys have specifically. Go ahead and fire them away. You can always drop comments underneath this video because I'm going to put that stuff. Good evening, King Yuzi. I saw Tiff was here. I saw a couple other folks. Mario, I believe, is here as well. Checking in. Feel free to drop comments on this video because I'm putting together notes. I'm taking notes. I actually have a notepad here that I have, scribbled down some of the thoughts that I have, as well as some of the questions that I want, because when I do a review of this camera, I want to review it as sort of standalone, and then I also want to review it in specific comparison to the X100F, and I want to kind of, because that's really the decision that I'm faced with right now, because financially, I don't think that I can justify keeping both the 100F and the X-E3, so I'm going to have to kind of go one way or the other. But I also want to review this just as a standalone to say this is kind of what this camera works for, and or who it might be a good fit for, and what I think of it, how I feel about it. So I'm gonna get to I see some questions popping up here already, which is awesome. I will pick up the camera as necessary to gesticulate, but just initial impressions, I kind of wanted to not like this camera, honestly. Like when I got it, like I was prepared to be fairly disconnected and detached from it, but so far the trade-offs are very clear, which is one of the things that I like about this camera, is it's very clear. Like there are certain things that you're giving up, and the things that you're getting in addition are also really exciting. And the touchscreen, for me, when I first turned the camera on, it was very disorienting not having that D-pad to go through the menu, and so having to make that adjustment to do everything with the touchscreen just about and use the joystick has been it took a few hours to kind of get used to that. However, and it is small, which is an advantage, it's a disadvantage depending on how you're looking at it and what you want to do with it. The body is small, but the lenses are still not that small, and so this is still not really jacket pocketable. The X100F is still something you can slip in your jacket pocket because it's got a pancake on it. This thing, the body is tiny. This is only a little bit bigger than this is like right between the X100F and the Sony RX100 Mark IV, which is like tiny, very little body, and it's perfect size. My 3-year-old daughter was taking pictures of me, and you can see that if you go on my Twitter feed at Living Vertical. You can see some of that as well. I mean, it's a perfect size camera. It feels super comfortable in my hands. I've tested it with like some big manual focus vintage lenses, like big lenses. I've tested it a lot with the 23. It's just overall, it's very, very, very impressive. Just the speed of the autofocus on this camera, specifically like tracking autofocus. I was playing around with it a little bit with my daughter today before she left, and just kind of spray and pray, trying to get it, put face recognition on, just let it track her away as she was like running. We were actually playing tag, and I was running with the camera, taking pictures, all that, and I'm gonna have videos of that coming up eventually here on the channel here in the next couple of weeks as I get that stuff really processed. But the speed and the accuracy and the precision of the autofocus on this is noticeably better even than the X-T2, even with the firmware updates. So that puts it really head and shoulders above the X100T. Again, if you need autofocus, and not everybody does, but for me, it was something that really, really stood out to me. Was like the autofocus is wow, it's really nice, and the touchscreen is really exciting, but the news is not all good. There's definitely some work left to be done on everything. So overall it's a very impressive camera, very nice camera. I really, really like it a lot. And I'm going to look at your questions here now and kind of start digging into that and give you specific feedback. But while the technology that is in this camera, since this is the first or one of the first cameras that Fuji's really embraced the touchscreen technology, it's exciting for that fact, and I think that it's actually pretty well implemented. It's just their actual execution of touch technology still has to mature a little bit. Like the tracking and just kind of the way everything processes, and kind of the speed of reaction between your touch and the responsiveness of the touch tracking on the Panasonic cameras is very, very fluid. It's very direct, whereas with this there's a little lag, there's a little delay, and that can create some issues, especially if you're trying to use the EVF and then touch focus on the screen at the same time, because and that's a whole thing that I'm going to get into in the review. And then of course the EVF is really, I was really, really surprised, because having used a number of the Fuji X cameras, the Viewfinder is something that's always been very outstanding on most of their cameras, and the Viewfinder on this, I don't know that the Viewfinder is really smaller by a whole bunch, but it's not very recessed, and so the little eyepiece here, I'm trying to see if you can kind of, it's kind of right. It's right on the surface there, so you can't. When you put your eye up to it, it's not recessed in where the outskirts or the flange on the eyepiece would block the external light, and so when you're looking up to it, it's really. It feels kind of cramped. It doesn't feel very comfortable, whereas like the XT1, XT2, certainly the GH5, like the GH5, and I use all my cameras with glasses, so I mean I can only get my eye so close, but for all of those other aforementioned viewfinders, I can put them like kind of up to my glasses without having to press my face in there, and I can see very, very clearly without any effort. It's really solid. Whereas this camera, the EVF is definitely not a strong point on it, which is kind of, it's a bummer. So there's good news, there's bad news. Overall, for me, that I think that I have to test it a little more to really make a decision or determination on kind of how the you know, pros and cons stack up, and that's always the fun part, because not everybody sees the same benefits as being beneficial, and not everybody sees the, you know, the same drawbacks as being that detrimental. Slower autofocus for one person isn't going to be the same thing as for another. So okay, sorry for my little soliloquy there. I'm going to scroll back through, and oh, Brian is here. Hi, Brian. And Can I NYC, good first camera from iPhone 4 for Instagram. In terms of a first camera, you know, I have to say, yeah, that's actually who I think this camera is aimed at. If you're comfortable with touch technology, you're coming from a smartphone predominantly, this is very, very simple. It's laid out in a way where it feels very intuitive to use. The touch technology is again, the touch technology is nowhere as smooth and as precise as what you're used to on an iPhone. And that's one of the things that I've been tripping over a little bit as I've been using it, because having the touch screen, as especially for you know, when you're shooting with this and you're like manual focusing on, let's say, on vintage glass, you can double tap the screen and it automatically goes into focus check, like the same as it would if you push the wheel or what have you, and you can kind of push, you know, move that focal point around the screen while you're focusing, and it allows you to really smooth out the, and using vintage lenses on this camera is one thing that for me I think is going to make it really hard to send this camera back, because of the fact that the manual focus game on this camera is so strong, and I love vintage lenses, and so the touchscreen is really good. It feels really intuitive. The only problem is, like I mentioned before, some of the tracking and the precision of the way the screen responds is not the same as like an iPhone would be, and so that's something that I'm very hopeful. I'm not, like, you know, bashing Fuji on that. I think that's something that they're going to fix over time. It's just going to take them a little while to get there and to, you know, update the algorithm and get the firmware up to speed there. So yeah, I think this is an excellent camera for something like, I think it's really aimed at people who are traveling, who are going to be doing a lot of Instagram type stuff. It transfers, you know, everything. Like all the Fuji cameras honestly do a really good job with, hey Randy, good evening sir. Yeah, you know, all the Fuji cameras, at least the recent models from the X100T on forward that I know of, they all do a really good job with Wi-Fi and image transfer. I will say that the whole Bluetooth thing, I've been trying the Bluetooth on the, I'm streaming on my iPhone 6 Plus right now, and the Bluetooth connectivity has not gone off very smoothly for me. Can't get it to find, and again, this isn't to say, that's why these are initial impressions. That doesn't mean that there's no way to do it or that it's bad or what have you. It's just that as somebody who has shot with a bunch of Fuji cameras before, it is not so straightforward that I can pick up the camera and just like, boom, start using the Bluetooth on this phone. That's been my experience so far. I know other people have had no problem with the Bluetooth, and it's nice to have some connectivity that goes directly, and that's good to go. But with this, you know, it's a little bit, it's been a little bit touch and go as far as that goes. All right, let's see. Oh, we do have a troll. That's good. Okay, well, trolls, that means we're doing something right. But yeah, it's also the form factor, and that it's so small makes it really good. Makes it really good for Instagram, and that's kind of what I would recommend it for. You know, if you're doing a lot of your own shooting, and you don't need dual card slots, you don't necessarily need weather sealing or any of that stuff. I mean, even as a second body, in relationship to like an X-T2 or something, it's really good. But I feel like the folks for whom this will be a most natural progression will be somebody who's used to shooting with an iPhone already, and is kind of reliant on that touch technology. Does have 4K video, King Uzi. The 4K video, because of the way that it uses the sensor readout, the 4K video is not as sharp as like in the X-T2. However, the X-T2 had a little bit of a crop on the 4K. This does not crop the 4K. I've only really been shooting, I've shot a little video in it so far. I've only been shooting the video in 1080. Very interested to continue playing with the video just because I want to see that I want to see how it does with the autofocus in video, because the autofocus in stills is so mind-blowingly impressive to me, especially for a tiny little camera this size. It's just really it's blown me away over the little bit that I've been playing with it, so I'm curious to see how it does. I think that, again, most people who buy this camera are not going to be buying it for a video camera. It is the type of camera that if you want to shoot video, you can set it up to shoot video, but I don't think this is going to be in, you know, half video. It's definitely not aimed in a hybrid market. So it doesn't crop 4K. No, the 4K is not as good because it doesn't crop it. So basically it uses a full sensor readout. This is my understanding. I'm not an engineer. This is just repeating a little bit of what I've heard from others who are a little bit more savvy about the engineering that goes into this. The reason why they crop the 4K on the X-T2 is in order to achieve better sharpness and better image quality in the 4K video. For this one, they're kind of figuring this, aiming this at folks who are going to be able to take or leave a little bit of like image quality, but would prefer to be able to still have 4K in the full without the crop. That's kind of what my understanding of it is. So when they crop it, that increases the image quality by a little bit. Of course, on 1080 there's no image cropping or anything like that to worry about, so you're getting really good, you know, IQ on 1080, and that's all I've shot so far is 1080. And again, this is definitely not something, I mean, the X-T2 in a lot of ways I think was billed as, you know, the 4K was prominently displayed. Whether or not it was meant to be a video camera, you know, I've argued that ad nauseum in many comments, with people getting irritated at me for my critiques of the X-T2. But this camera is different from the X-T2 in that it can shoot 4K video, but is very clearly not aimed at video shooters. Doesn't have the log, doesn't have it, like the audio jack is a 2.5 millimeter little like squirrely jack where you have to get adapters and stuff. Like, it's definitely not meant to be a video camera, although it has video capabilities. So I'm willing to forgive a little bit more and probably not go into as great a detail for the video side, although I'm interested just to play with the film simulations and just to see what it can do, because I think that with relative, and the one thing I will also say about this is, like, this is so light and so easy to handle that this stays, it's fairly easy to handhold footage, and just the little bit that I was shooting video with it, it was, you know, I was impressed with the way everything looked. And the film simulations are super fun to play with too, so it's kind of a different ball of wax, but even as much as it looks like some of the other Fuji cameras, it actually feels, the experience of shooting with it is just very different. And it feels more fun, more playful. Maybe it's the fact that everything is, you know, based on touch technology now in this version. But that's just kind of my impressions. Okay, let me scroll back a little bit here. We got a couple of the questions. Okay. Paul Best Photography says, I tried it out. I really like that I can drag the focus with my finger while my eye is up to the viewfinder. Now, Paul, not trying to be disagreeable, but I really was not happy with that particular feature, at least as it is executed right now, because I feel like the responsiveness of the focus point when you're trying to aim with it up to your eye and you're trying to adjust the focus point here on the screen, you're kind of adjusting the focus point blind and you have to drag it. So when the camera is on, normally you can tap the focus point to get it to move, right? Or you can drag it. When it's up to your eye, the only thing you can do is drag it. There's no tap on there as an alternative, and so you have to drag everything, and then when you're dragging the touch point around, because you can't actually, you're doing that kind of blind with the camera up to your eye, if you don't get it precisely right, I've had a number of times happen where it automatically triggers one of the swipe functions on the screen, and then you're changing your film simulation when you're trying to be just moving your focus point, and you got to take the whole thing and do it. So I found myself, when I have it up to the EVF, which again, the EVF is like the one thing where it's just kind of like, come on guys, like the one thing that I feel like Fuji is known for doing really, really well is the one thing that they kind of crap the bed on with this thing is the EVF is really not, and again, EVFs aren't important to everybody, and I never really thought an EVF was that important to me, but there are some times when I want to use it, and when I want to use it is only when I really need it, and having an EVF that feels really subpar I mean, they've set the bar really high with their other cameras and the EVFs on their other cameras, and having one that is so lackluster compared to their other cameras, it's really disappointing, because there are some things that I understand, like dual card slots, weather sealings, like that's just a different class of camera, and as much as I want those to be on this camera, it's never going to happen, and for a good reason. But having a little bit more plastic here on the EVF to make it work better, like that's such a simple thing that they already know to do, and it's like, come on. It's just a little bit frustrating. Again, I don't know that that's going to be a deal breaker for me, but that's kind of just a little bit about my experience using the touch focus with the EVF up to my eye. I found myself going for the joystick and using that much more consistently than any sort of tap focusing, because it's just I found it too clunky. And your mileage may vary, and the other thing too with that is that the speed at which the tracking or the focus point tracks and follows your finger when you're swiping, it's not as responsive and precise. And that's something that definitely makes a little bit of a problem, because like you think you got your finger, especially if you're trying to be a little precise with the focal point, and you move it and you think you have it, it's like, oh, I didn't quite hit the mark, and now I got to move it over a little bit more, and you're like just trying to nudge it this way or that way. It just, the touch technology still has some work to do before it's fully mature. However, no, I will say I do trust Fuji to take the steps to mature that, because they do great work with their firmware updates, no question about that. And then the other part of it is, once that firmware update comes through, or updates come through, and the algorithm improves and the touch technology is more accurate and precise, it's going to be really, really awesome. It's going to be really good, kind of like the Panasonic cameras have been for the last 3 years. Anyways, nothing but love for the Fujis. I just had to throw that in there. AJ Online says my XE3 should be here this week. That is awesome. Curious to hear, AJ, how you feel about selling the X-T2 once you get the XE3. Brian Mercado asks, if I can only have one Fuji camera regardless of cost, which one would it be? Would it be the X-E3? Oh man, that is such, and I've been wrestling with this question a whole bunch, because this camera feels different than the X-T2. It has, and again, at the risk of being a little, warm, fuzzy, and flowery about this, piece of technology that's just supposed to be a tool serving a purpose, this camera feels really fun. It feels like very, very well conceived, very well executed. There's so much that I love about this camera, because it's small, but it's not tiny. It's very cleanly and simply designed, but it's not like lacking anything. Like I said previously, if I could get a little weather sealing in this body, and I would rather have, the problem is, the Fuji bodies keep getting smaller and smaller, and that's great. I appreciate that effort, and I'm going to get to your question, Tiff, in a second about the Pancake Lens, because that is a good segue here. what would really make the bigger difference in terms of portability, I could take another centimeter in any direction on this camera and it would still be pocketable and very, very useful if there was a lens that was about half as tall. And that's the thing, like the 23mm Pancake lens that's on the 100F, if I could get a series of lenses like that that were portable for this camera, it would just it would make my day. And I think it would make this camera into a whole different animal because it would be super, super, super portable. I know the 27.28 Pancake, I've heard good things about it. I don't have it. I haven't used it. It's a focal length that, and I feel like Fuji has, you know, kind of dabbled in the Pancake lenses because, you know, they can't really seem to commit there. But at the end of the day, the Pancake lenses, like, there should be a line of Pancake lenses in the same way that they have the f2, you know, the f2 versus the f1.4 in like the 35, and I guess the 23 and like the 50 versus the 56. Like, they have like kind of performance lens, and then they have like beater lenses, if you will. I know that these f2 lenses aren't, you know, aren't really beater lens, but you know what I'm saying. Like, to have something that's a little bit where you're making the trade-offs that are necessary, because if I wanted to say, look, I'm going climbing or I'm going backpacking, and I could put in a little Pancake lens, I would sacrifice a little bit of sharpness at the corners to be able to get the image quality and performance out of the rest of this camera, but also be able to have some of the versatility that I could still maintain from being able to change lenses, and this camera would be it. And so I guess, Brian, in answer to your question, I'm still tossed up between this and the X-T2 because there are some things about the X-T2 that I do miss from this camera, and it's really, honestly, like, the articulating screen is not a big deal for me. I think that there is value to the articulating screen, but I think that the articulating screen is something that also does take time to set up. And so, you know, when you have to kind of pull out the screen and get it set up and get it adjusted and get everything kind of, you know, you're still taking a few seconds to do that. And in that time, if you have a camera that you know is going to nail focus, you can just go boom and nail a shot and go boom, boom, boom. Take a couple different ones and like look down, or there's workarounds that are equally simple. Not everybody shares that opinion. A lot of people, you know, hence the XT20 for a lot of people, but to me, the lack of a touchscreen isn't something that I really miss. It's the dual card slots, it is the weather sealing, and a metal body, an all metal body. And as it is, this has a decent amount of plastic in it, but it doesn't feel plasticky or super light. It's a good in between, but at the same time, if I knew that this thing were like a little bit more stout, from a durability perspective, I would be willing to say, yeah, this is the camera. This is the one camera. And you know, the X-T2 wasn't quite the one camera to rule them all, but yeah, it's between this and the X-T2 as kind of that one camera to rule them all. And the 100F. That's tough. That's a tough one too, because 100F with the built-in ND filter it offers so much versatility there. But I think that ultimately this one, so far, and you know, some of it may just be novelty. I'm going to be perfectly honest and say that it might just be that it's a new camera. I'm kind of enthralled with it, but I really do believe that they've taken a pretty impressive step forward here with the touchscreen technology and with the faster autofocus and the more accurate tracking autofocus. Really, I mean, it's really been impressive to me. So, Brian, the short answer is I don't really know, but it would be between I think the one camera is going to probably be the next iteration of the X-T2. That's going to be the one camera. Or, honestly, like, I don't know exactly why, and I say this rhetorically, but I feel like some of the smaller camera bodies, it would be worth it for them to put some weather sealing into these cameras, because having a weather seal lens is great, but you don't really get any benefit out of that when the camera isn't weather sealed, so you can't take it out and really do much shooting with it when the weather is a little bit inclement. And again, a camera like this camera screams to be like, throw me in your backpack, take me someplace, because this is tiny. It's a tiny little camera, but it's like compact. It's incredibly compact. It's like not tiny. Like the RX100 by Sony, that's a tiny camera. It's like, you know, so tiny that you have to really be careful with hitting the buttons. This thing is, I don't think you could go much smaller without it being too small. And that's the kind of camera that most people are going to want to take out into the world, but then you're immediately kind of hampered by not having the weather sealing. And again, not necessarily a deal breaker, but that is a big thing that I have a hard time letting go of from the X-T2. But this is darn close. Ooh, okay, we got a few more questions here. I know I got to move faster on these questions. I'm sorry, so I will try to do that. Okay. Tiff asked about a Pancake lens I'd consider investing in to make it pocketable. If so, what would that be? Tiff, honestly, if I could get something, like if they made, you know, theoretically, if they made a Pancake lens that was like a 23, like basically the lens that is on the 100F, I would go for that. In fact, I would buy that bundled as a kit instead of the 23, instead of this 23. And this, knowing that this 23, I mean, like I was shooting this wide open, and this is sharp as a tack, wide open, even up close. But the Pancake 23 that's on the 100F, it's still a good lens, and it's a focal length that I know and that I like, and I think that would be really, really useful for them to make a lineup, because this is just my impression, but that they are very, and this is not a negative thing necessarily, to a point, that they are so enamored with or focused on absolute image quality that I think that they may lose sight of some of the utility that you can get out of also having smaller pancakey alternatives to use. And I think that if there was a little bit more invested into those pancakes, a 23, a 35, basically all what all the WR lenses are that right now, the 23, 35, and the 50, if they made all of those in pancakes, I would probably get those in pancakes and then do most of my, you know, I would keep the 16 for, you know, landscape stuff and wider shots where I really needed the IQ, but for the most part, the image quality even on the X100F, it's superb. You know, even wide open it's good, it's just not wide, it's not great when it's wide open and close up. So if you want to shoot wide open, yeah, you got to back up a little bit, or you got to stop it down and you got to get a little bit closer, and then you still get the depth of field. So there's trade-offs and workarounds, but those Pancake lenses are still workable if you're willing to, and for portability to have that as an option, it's just kind of like, I'm so torn because it's that love and hate, because I love so much about this camera. It's so much of everything that I've been looking for in a little Fuji camera, but like there's just no way to get that lens smaller, and there's no way to put this in a jacket pocket with the lens, and it's just and actually, while I have you guys here, if anybody is planning on buying any lenses, any camera gear, specifically Fuji gear, I always link my Amazon links down in the show notes. That does support these videos, and it's always much appreciated when you guys use that. It costs you nothing extra, helps me make more of these videos, keep the lights on and the cameras rolling, as I like to say. And I will link all the gear that I'm talking about down here, and I always do in all of mine. The 18mm Pancake, good evening, Tomislav. Yeah, the 18mm Pancake, I'm curious about trying that. And if I do, and I say if, you know, right now, I don't want to even, I'm not going to make a commitment whether or not I think I'm going to keep this or the 100F. I actually may be able to license some video that I shot a year ago at Standing Rock, and that would be really superb, because then I would be able to keep both, at least for a time. But I think that ultimately I'm more tempted by the 18mm Pancake lens, because that's closer. I tend to prefer wider pancakes if I can get them, but that's definitely something I am interested in. It would be nice, like I said, to see them do more with that, because I think one of the things that Fuji has done to differentiate themselves and to kind of pull away from the competition is that they've really managed to bring lower end items up at a higher level of quality, like kit lenses, for example, right? Like kit lenses are always kind of looked down on. It's like, oh, that's a kit lens, that's junk, and no offense to any Sony users, but a lot of the Sony kit lenses are kind of, you know, they're like, eh, and trying to find a good, at least from what I've seen of them and from a lot of the stuff, because I've studied up on them a bit, you know, from specs wise, but the lower end Fuji lenses, there are not much in the way, at least recently what they've made. It seems like there's not a lot of duds in their lineup, and like it would be cool for them to really kind of put less focus at this point on pushing newer features out of the camera bodies and really try to get higher image quality into lower end products, which might not make financial sense for them, and that's probably why they haven't asked me to come and be on their board of directors, to, you know, give people more quality and lower cost items. But I think that that's something they've done really well, which is why they have such a loyal following. So let's see here. I gotta catch up here. I'm getting too bad here. Okay. Let me try to catch up here. We got some chatter from what's his face there. We got a troll. That's nice. Kim says, with all due respect, I think it was unfair to call him a troll. He just, oh boy. Okay. King Uzi Yusuf asks, I hear the Fuji has the best colors in their photos. How does this hold up? Good question. I think that ultimately a lot of that has to do with whether or not you shoot JPEG or RAW. I just posted 2 photos on my Twitter at Living Vertical, and you can see, and they're photos actually for the Living Vertical photo challenge that I'm doing right now. And my daughter, she was taking pictures of this with me. She's 3.5 years old, and my wife handed her the camera before I could stop her, because, you know, I love my daughter, but I don't necessarily trust her with. But it's small enough that she was, and for a 3-year-old, she's got some. I mean, she got some meat hooks on her. She got big hands for a little 3-year-old, if that's the right way to explain a 3-year-old's hands. But she was taking pictures of me, and so I posted one in color, one in black and white, that were raw conversions that were done all in the camera and then, you know, sent to the phone. So I think that Fuji's colors are consistently really good, but most of the time, being honest, I shoot raw because I prefer being able. I like, as we've talked on many of the, you know, the live streams that we've chatted on in the past. You know, I like to edit my photos. I like to monkey around with them. So shooting JPEGs, you know, the colors look good on JPEGs, and if I didn't want to, just for my own edification, edit raw photos, I would feel perfectly comfortable just using JPEGs, because the JPEGs are really good. The JPEGs are really, really good, and the colors are beautiful. But that is kind of that's a standard, that's a given as far as I'm concerned. You know, they're good. They got a lot of punch, a lot of contrast. And you can you know, tinker with all those values too, even if you're shooting raw on the camera and doing the processing in the camera of the raw image before sending it to your phone. My one gripe, and this is something that has been a gripe and continues to be a gripe for as long as I can remember about Fuji stuff, and it's surprising to me that they haven't fixed this, because I really would like to be able to use their in-camera raw processing more. But that is that when you're doing the processing, all the things that you're adding or subtracting or changing, they are, you can't see any of it happening. So the only way to make all these modifications and you change all these values on a photo, and then you don't see it until you've actually gone through the whole process and confirmed twice or in triplicate, and then it's like, okay, we've created this JPEG and now you can see how it looks, rather than be able to say, okay, what does it look like if I do this? What does it look like if I do that? And that is so clunky that it's kind of prevented me from using the in-camera raw processing as much as I would like to. Whereas if I could make those changes and actually see some representation of what's actually happening in the photo as I make the change, it would make that way, way, way more useful. And that has been a gripe that I've had since the very first Fuji I've ever owned, which was the X100T in 2014. And I've never thought to mention that until now. So that is something I will mention also as a gripe. And the EVF, I mean, come on guys, like the EVF really, it's one thing the Fuji does so well, and they just completely, they duke the bed on that one, and it's just, it's like that Achilles heel thing. It's an Achilles heel thing. How does it compare to the A6500? I really don't know how to compare it directly to the A6500 because I have not shot with the A6500 at all. I think that you know, if you're shooting mostly stills, it's a different conversation than if you're interested in video. If you're interested in video, I would say probably pass on this and go with the Sony, because the in-body image stabilization, because I also have a Panasonic G5 which has outstanding in-body image stabilization and a good stabilized lens as well. And I can tell you that the IBIS makes a huge difference with shooting handheld video, vlogging, anything where, you know, you have to kind of wear a bunch of hats. And in that kind of a scenario, you want to have a good camera with IBIS. Although in most situations, I would personally still probably push somebody towards a Panasonic G85 over an A6500, but that's just my personal preference because I like Panasonic and I like their IBIS a little bit better, and I think that the Micro Four Thirds is not nearly as bad as a lot of measure baiters like to say, or pixel peepers, or however you want to look at that. I think that the Micro Four Thirds sensor does really fantastic things, and its smallness is part of the advantage when it comes to reliability with battery life and all of that. So this camera, I wouldn't compare it to that for video's sake. But if you're interested in like 60/40 with, I mean, even then I still wouldn't really, because just for video at all, like no in-body image stabilization, and it's a whole thing to set up, like for the time and effort. And I have to use this more in video to be able to clearly articulate why I would not recommend this for video. It's just, I think that for a video camera, like there are certain ergonomic and layout handling features that enable a camera to be used more for video that Panasonic just always has, and that make it very inviting for video. This does not have the flipping screen that comes out and allows you to kind of view things differently. It articulates and moves, and the maturity of the touch technology and all of that is a big thing. And the in-body image stabilization, of course, is really significant too for video. So yeah, I wouldn't say it stacks up particularly well compared to the A6500 for video. For stills, I would take a Fuji camera over a Sony camera for stills, just at personal preference, and I think image quality is at least as good. Somebody might be able to do 100% blow-up comparisons on Lightroom and maybe you know, say which one is definitively better, but when you look at the photos, they both take really good photos. So I would say it's dead even there. But the thing is that the difference between what makes a camera better than another, a lot of it has to do with how it feels and how you like the camera and the experience of shooting the camera. I mean a lot of it, the technical components, the things that you would look at on paper and say this camera is better because, or that camera is better because. Some cameras may have a different type of technology, but it's implemented better or worse than the others. The usability, the experience of shooting with it, that's the thing that I always really focus on the most, because I haven't found a camera that really takes bad pictures at this point. You know, anything that you're paying a decent amount of money for, you're going to have a camera that is very capable of taking good pictures if you give it good light and you know how to kind of work around some of the foibles and you learn the curves. The question is, which cameras are the ones that speak to your style and that feel fun to use, where you're like, man, I just want to pick this camera up and go play with it, go shoot stuff. And for me, that's one of the things I really love about the Fuji cameras, and also just the experience and the continuity between one camera and the next. It's like there's a lot of consistent features in the design and everything else that you feel very at home going from one to the next. It's like a different room in the house, but you can tell that it's all connected, and that's the thing that, you know, that I personally just love about the Fuji cameras. And I got a question there a little bit back about kind of this versus an X Pro 2, a used X Pro 2. I have not used the X Pro 2. I've only used the X Pro 1. I really like, there are some things that I like about having a slightly chunkier, beefier body on a camera. Again, I think a lot of it comes down to budget and what it is that you want to do. I don't know off the top of my head if the X Pro 2 is weather sealed or not. I seem to think that it is not, but I could be wrong. You know, again, having not shot with the X Pro 2, it's hard to make a direct comparison. It's also hard to compare this stuff when the touch technology is not really in the other, either the X Pro 2 or the XT2 the same way it is in here, and also when the focusing speed is so much faster. I think, again, a lot of it comes down to, thank you, Rob, Zion Jeeps, appreciate the love for the hair. Yeah, I've gotten bored here in New York, so I've actually started playing with my hair. The X Pro 2 should have weather sealing, weather resistant. So if that is the case, you know, that certainly would factor into the discussion. I think that a lot of it depends on what it is that you're trying to shoot and what you want to do with it. Let me put it this way: when I took this camera out of the package and I held it in my hand, the word workhorse does not enter my mind. Doesn't enter my mind. Like, this is a fun camera, but it's not something that screams workhorse, like, this is a tool type of camera. This is like, hey, this is fun. Like, this is a camera that you can kind of take anywhere, shoot any type of thing. It's not going to be in your way. And it's a good balance between a lot of different things. There definitely are compromises with this camera because of the fact that it's size and all of that. But, like, still, the compromises that you're giving up are for maybe ease of use rather than can I execute this type of shoot or not. In terms of just straight image quality, I think this is every bit as good as the X Pro 2, coupled with the same glass. Or not. Good question. Carlos asks if the X100F would be a workhorse. There again, I would say it's not. It doesn't feel like a workhorse to me, just because of the fact that it's, the body is a little bit lighter, a little bit more plasticky. The XT2 feels a lot more solid. It feels a lot heavier. Not heavier, but just like more sturdy. Not to a fault, and not to the extent that, honestly, like, I wouldn't consider this camera less portable or less fun if it were a little bit more burly and it had more metal in it and it were weather sealed. It would still be super portable. And it's not flimsy by any stretch either. It's a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter, and it doesn't have quite the robust nature. And I think part of that too is, you have the one memory card and it's still, here in the bottom and a couple other things like that. It's not a matter, from a climbing perspective, right? When I got a harness as a professional guide, it's not like the just recreational climbing harness would break when I would hang in it. It's just that the recreational harness might have a couple less gear loops, might be a little bit less durable to where I would have to buy, one every year instead of one every 2 years, or two a year instead of one every 6 months or what have you. And so I think that has somewhat to do with the assessment of, the comparison with the pro features and what have you. Okay, so thank you, Brian. Brian McKenzie says XT2 and X Pro 2 are both weather sealed. I knew the XT2 was because I had that, but yeah. Yeah, I'm glad that makes sense to you, Randy. I'm glad you it's hard to know which is going to be better, because there could be even some professional capacities in which you would actually do a better job as a professional with a camera that is more discreet and that's more fun. A lot of that has to do with your style too, like, and it can be little things, but a camera like this, I mean, this thing is kind of, you know, this would almost be like a toy camera, like a joke go into some sort of professional function, but at the same time, the image quality out of this thing is just mind-bending. And again, the autofocus on this, the tracking autofocus, I didn't tune anything up. This is like straight out of the box autofocus tracking. You know, it was hitting my daughter without me like really. I wasn't looking at the screen. I was just like spray and pray, like shotgun style, point, not aim. For those of you who may not be firearms aficionados, you know, and it was finding her face and maintaining focus. And once it found her face, it was just like even like running towards, running away, just the whole nine. Really. Frank asks if it tracks better than the X-T2. I didn't shoot a lot of tracking with the X-T2 after the firmware updates, but the X-T2 right out of the box, I would say that yes, it definitely tracks better than the X-T2 right out of the box. But I don't typically shoot a lot of stuff with tracking, so you know, maybe I'm easily impressed, but I would say that this is noticeably better tracking than the X-T2 was. And I read somewhere, because I wanted to try to formulate some of my own thoughts about this camera before I really started reading about it, just to kind of see how, after I had a framework of opinions established after shooting over the weekend, I started reading about it a little bit, and I think they said that the algorithm for tracking is supposed to be 40% faster or better. The number 40% was in there somewhere. And I would say that that sounds right to me, given my experience, what I've shot with the X-T2, especially, I mean, it is noticeably faster and also precise. That's the other thing, to where, you know, there's not a delay. It's like you push the button and it's like bang, 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 bang. Push the button, bang, takes a picture, and it's on. It finds it, and it's just, there's no hunting or any of that stuff, and that's right out of the box. So I'm incredibly enthusiastic about, you know, to see what they can do with some firmware updates even. And then of course what I anticipate happening, I anticipate them then kind of nailing this down in this kind of mid-level model, and then they're going to come out with the XT2S or whatever their kind of second iteration of the XT2 or XT3 or whatever that's going to be. They're going to put this same technology, maybe some of that touch stuff, in there with the flip screen and the weather sealing, and it's going to be just about perfect. And then all we'll need is Pancake Lens, and we'll have like the one camera to rule them all that does everything with in-body image stabilization, kind of that dream camera that we've all been fantasizing about, that has, you know, some of the best parts of the Panasonic system with the best parts of the Fuji system, specifically their sensor and some of the other guts. Like, they're definitely closing in on something that's going to be a real home run. Carlos, yes, thank you for reminding me about that. I appreciate, I saw that question earlier and I forgot to answer that. Will I dip out on the GH5? Tough question. The GH5 is a really, really, really good camera, and it would take a lot for me to bail on the GH5. It would take a lot. Because of the fact that the GH5, it's like, I want to shoot with this camera. I want to keep this camera. I need to keep the GH5. The GH5 is a camera that I could go out there and do pretty much anything, and I could do it well enough to where, you know, if I had to do everything with one camera, it would be the GH5. Because the trade-offs that I have to make for the way that I shoot and what I shoot, I could make those trade-offs with the GH5 and I could still do all right. I would love to see something that could shake my confidence in the GH5, but the other thing too, the battery life on the GH5. I mean, there's all these different points that eventually, once I kind of sit down and flesh this stuff out, I'm going to, you know, organize these thoughts a little bit more and try to give some comparisons, A, B, C, and D, and kind of how they all stack up with each other. But the GH5 is a really fantastic machine, and I don't think it's impossible for Fuji to catch the GH5 on their next iteration of the X-T2, but I think they would have to do more than just make a little bit, you know, it's like they're going to have to do more than just kind of bump that incrementally out. And it's little things like, you know, kind of handicapping the EVF on this thing that frustrate me a little bit. And it's not to say that, because Panasonic kind of did a similar thing with, from what I've heard, because I was thinking about the GX85, and apparently they've done a very similar thing where the EVF on the GX85 sucks and it's terrible. But like all the cameras, the G7, G85, and the GH5, GH4, like those all have beautiful, big, brilliant, awesome EVFs. And so honestly, I was kind of bummed about the EVF on this. It's just like, oh man. And I'm going to work around it. You know, I toggled the diopter a little bit to make it match my stigmatism a little bit better, and that definitely helped somewhat. So one kind of quick tip I would say, if you are having issues with the EVF, maybe you wear glasses, maybe you should be wearing glasses, try messing around with the little diopter knob here that kind of changes the focal proportion or relationship based on your eyes focal needs, or whatever those may be, and you may find that it improves your experience with the EVF, but it's still not going to change the fact that it's not recessed, and it's always going to be letting light in from different angles, and it's like just literally 2 millimeters of plastic around that thing, and we wouldn't be having this conversation, I don't think. Okay, let's see, where are we at here? Got to scroll back. Getting long-winded. Good evening, Daniel Crotty. I agree. I agree about the Fuji with the lens selection. I know not everybody always agrees with that, but I tend to agree with you that the Fuji has a better value and quality usability. And the autofocus, I think that whatever lead phone... I always do that, and it's always by accident, I swear. I'm not trying to bag on Sony. Almost said phony. I think that what Sony has in terms of autofocus on the video, I think that Fuji is like nipping at their heels with what I'm seeing in here. And I have to test the autofocus strictly for the video to see if that holds true, but the autofocus, even on the X-T2 after the firmware updates, really got a lot better. It's just the battery life on the X-T2 for me, without a grip, really handicapped it, whereas the GH5, you can shoot all day, stills, video going back and forth, and that's the other thing, that very small thing that most people don't really value or think about, because it's not a big ticket item from a technical perspective, but on the GH5 there's like a movie mode that you can have all set up for all your movie settings. So if you're shooting 60 frames per second, you can have it set up at 1/120th of a second. You can have everything dialed in the way that you want it, with everything in full auto, and then you can have, you know, you can toggle your camera to your with the wheel on top, the selector wheel, to whatever settings that you're using for shooting stills, and those will be maintained separately and independently, so that you can say, I'm shooting stills, bang, 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 and I'm shooting at like 1/500th of a second with ISO, blah, 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 and then you can go back to shooting, 1/120th of a second, 60 frames per second, just by one move, and all the settings go back and forth. So that you're able to really use it very interchangeably for stills and video, and Fuji does not have that at all in their cameras. And I think part of that probably has something to do with the external controls, the externality of the controls that we know and love. Hey, Sean Kim Style, good to see you here, buddy. The first person that I personally knew who got an XE3. So yeah, good to see you here, Sean. Yeah, back to the Lightroom. Yeah, I use Lightroom on my phone to edit King Uzi. And Tomislav, the Fujifilm Studio will allow converting RAW in camera via computer. I'm not sure if I understand the benefit of using that, unless that's an adaptation to the to the camera. How long can the XE3 record video. Let's see. So I believe there is a... Okay, so full HD I can shoot for... Right now this says 69 minutes, so it doesn't... Snappy autofocus too. Okay, so it says there's 69 minutes left on the card once I push the record button. This is full HD at 60p, and it says it's 15-minute record limit on full HD. Good evening, Tomislav. Hopefully we'll see you around here soon. Oh, bugger, and there goes the battery. I was just gonna try something else out. Okay, so there is at least a 15-minute recording limit for full HD videos at 60p, and I'm assuming there would be at least that and up. Good evening, Christopher, checking in from Seattle. Good to have the West Coast here with us tonight. And the other, case in point is the fact that, the battery life on this, it goes from that like 1/3 to 1/4 of a battery left. It drops from there to 0 like that. And that's one of the big things about the GH5 that I've mentioned before that I love is with the GH5, if it says you have half a battery left, you have as much in the second half just about as you did in the first half. Whereas with like this camera, it says you have 100%, everything is good, then it's like 80%, and then once you get anywhere around 50%, basically you have like 10% left, because any little bit of shooting after that point, it's just going to drain that second half of the battery really, really fast, and that is incredibly irritating. And I actually don't have the Bluetooth even turned on in this, because like I said before, the Bluetooth connectivity with my phone, I have been having no success getting the Bluetooth to connect on here, and I can't even connect the Wi-Fi unless I turn the Bluetooth on in the camera. So that's another thing that's kind of been a little bit clunky, and I'm hoping that I might get that resolved before I do too much else with it. And yes, the shutter button, I'm sorry I missed that question there, your shutter button is being used to record video, which the video looks beautiful out of this thing. At least the HD video looks really good, but it does have at least a 15-minute record limit on HD, so I'm assuming it's got that or more of a time limit on the 4K. But personally, other than testing purposes, I will not be using the XE3 for any sort of 4K video, just because if I want 4K video, I'm just going to stick to the GH5 and use that. But for doing some 1080 video, especially with film simulations, I think that could be kind of fun. Because the shooting like the Across simulation in the video is pretty neat. It looks pretty cool. It's a nice effect, whereas again, it's more fun. And I think that's one of the things that this camera does really well. It's aimed at people who are coming to their system, who definitely want some fun baked into everything else that they're doing. And if you're not taking everything super, super seriously, you can still get seriously awesome image quality out of the XE3, but it's designed in a way that's meant to feel fun. And for some people, that just doesn't matter at all. They just are looking for a tool. And I think that, it's certainly as good as anything else out there when it comes to being a tool for that end. But I think that the thing that I really have been impressed with is that ability to match the image quality and the performance of the camera with the fun and just like a very clean, simple, smooth layout that, again, is not completely without its problems, but I am excited to see Fuji do some work on some of this stuff and iron it out, especially the touchscreen, the reliability and responsiveness of the touchscreen specifically. If I missed anybody's questions that's still here from earlier, please shoot me your questions. I'm totally happy to repeat anything if some of you are checking in a little bit later, maybe missed some of the live stream. Happy to share other things. And if you asked a question up earlier and I was busy ranting or thanking Rob for complimenting my hair, which hey, I appreciate those compliments. I'd be more than happy to, I'm probably not going to be able to go back and sort out the questions about stuff that were all buried in there with that dude from Thailand who was asking about Pornhub. And of course now just for saying Pornhub on this is going to be demonetized. So thanks, YouTube. Hey, good evening. Queen of San McKean, good to see you in here as well. Checking in on the Sunday PM live stream. Yeah, I felt a little bit bad. I didn't get to do as long of a live stream as I would normally do on Friday, but that's why I'm doing more of these and trying to kind of space things out a little bit more so that I have, you know, a little bit of better time management here. You know, that's my goal. Anybody who is interested, we are still doing the Living Vertical Photo Challenge on Twitter. I know that's kind of dropped off a little bit, but I've been trying to talk about them on the live stream. LV Photo Challenge is the hashtag, and this current Living Vertical Photo Challenge is just, we're doing just blur, trying to make blurry pictures. Not like all blurry, but creative use or implementation of camera blur. And I had my daughter step in to pinch hit for me, which you can see on my Twitter at Living Vertical if you want to see some of that, if you want to participate. We're also on Instagram doing the Living Vertical Photo Challenge, so I just want to kind of friendly reminder, anybody who's interested in participating in that, we're still doing that, although like I said, the pace has kind of slackened a little bit because just had midterms and I have a documentary project that I'm working on that's kind of that frankly I need to really get the lead out here because I need to have a video portion of that project done very soon. And as much as I love sitting around talking about and testing out new cameras, you know, it's King Uzi says, I haven't done much for this challenge. Can I post older photos? Sure, would love to see those older photos. You know, it's good stuff. Hey Dane, good to see you here too, and thank you. Yeah, the photo challenges they're pretty fun. I learn a lot of stuff from seeing what everybody else puts out there, and it's always good for me to, you know, have somewhat of a limitation to work around. The self-portrait one was the hardest one so far by a pretty long margin because it really felt like I was, you know, doing work and trying to figure out how to take new pictures of myself that I felt good about or good enough about to post. But I think that's what makes it more rewarding. And yeah, some Queen of San Joaquin killed it. She did some really cool portraits. The one of you reading the book or the journal with the cigarette, that was one of my favorite. Like, that was really, really, really good. And I think it was just good because it just felt super, super natural. It felt very natural, not like supernatural. Like, but it felt incredibly like relaxed and like it looked like something that somebody else did. Like, it didn't look like you were, you know, like trying to set up the camera and, you know, push the button or anything like that. It just looked very, very like very smooth, and that's a hard thing to do. So yeah, and I've loved seeing the work that everybody's done. And King Uzi, you're absolutely right. You definitely learn a lot about yourself when you're having to photograph. Yeah, the ND filter, absolutely. That's one of the things that it was, the ND filter and the double exposure. Those are the things that really inspired me to kind of using those initially on the 100F. That's what really got me interested in doing this for a challenge. And that would be another thing too, if I'm, you know, since I'm putting in unrealistic wishes for Fuji, if they would ever put in into an interchangeable lens camera, if they would put in an ND filter in there, that would be awesome. But I don't think that's ever going to happen. And there's probably good reasons for it from an engineering standpoint, but it would be pretty sweet, you know. Yeah, well, those spur of the moment photos, a lot of times, you know, that's when you're either really happy that you have a camera with you, or again, assuming, you know, you could still, you know, do that shot with a phone. You don't have to necessarily have a, you know, full-on camera, but there are times when there have been, just about every time I find that I have a camera, I feel like it benefits me and I wind up taking a picture of something that I'm glad that I had a camera there to take a picture of. And I don't know whether it changes it, you know, bends the matrix, or whether it's just the fact that we notice more stuff. And one thing I have noticed, and this may sound really weird, if you take a camera out without batteries, maybe one that has an optical viewfinder, but you go and you look with a camera that you can't actually shoot, it really makes you notice stuff in a way that you don't notice otherwise, at least not nearly as, for me. It's just totally different. Like, it happened to me where I left the house without a memory card in one of my cameras where I was going out to shoot one day for the challenge. And so I was out there and I'm carrying a camera around, and so I'm like all excited looking for something to shoot, and then it's like, oh, I don't have a memory card, but I still had a camera with me, so it felt like I was out, you know, shooting, but I couldn't actually shoot. So instead of like just going for that gratification of like, oh, this could be cool, bang, let me see what that looks like, and chimping, I, you know, just kind of went and was just looking through the viewfinder, which of course EVF only, so can't do that with this. But on the X, no, not the X, I think the X Pro 1, does it have an optical viewfinder? I forget. But yeah, and this actually has a shoot with without SD card mode on it, but I disabled that after having learned my lesson once doing a portrait session with family that were like all really antsy to leave, and family gathering, everybody's like, oh, let's just do a couple group photos, the first time we've been together in forever, and like, you know, took a bunch of photos, and then there was no memory card. Fortunately, we discovered that before everybody went to their four corners of the earth, because everybody was in town from like all over. And that was with the XT10, and so I've made a note and disabled shoot without SD card mode on this one, so that I won't have that problem. Let's see here, where are we on the questions? Tiff says, I am glad I got the iPhone 8 Plus because I've been using it more, even if I am carrying my camera. I love having options. Yeah, some people like options. I don't know. I like options until I don't have them. Or I don't like options until I don't have them. Then I'm like, I want options. So I guess maybe I'm just indecisive. I'm a great consumer though. Fuji loves me. Maybe they don't. I don't know. Maybe I've offset my purchasing impact by detracting, keeping other people away from their cameras, because I tend to be nitpicky in my gripes when I review cameras, because I like to be nitpicky about stuff. I feel like, you know, I was talking to somebody about this today. One of the comments, one of my videos, like, you know, a lot of the stuff that I had, like in the latest video I did about the X100F, it was kind of nitpicky, like some of the drawbacks, but I feel like the negatives are things that are really important to highlight, because everybody wants to hear, after they've bought a camera and they watch the review, they want somebody to tell them that they made the right choice. And if they haven't bought the camera yet, they already are watching it because they kind of want it, and they want somebody to tell them that it's the right choice, and this is, you know, it's worth it for you to get it, you know. And for me, I like to try to discourage somebody at that point, because if you can be discouraged, I'm probably doing you a favor if I'm steering you away from the camera. If you hear all the bad stuff, even as nitpicky as it can be, and you're like, no, this is still good to go, then chances are you'll buy the camera anyways, and you'll be happy you did, but at least you'll go into it knowing what you know, and that's that, you know. Oh, well, I got you to buy into the XT2. Well, that's good. That's good. I'm glad. Some people do like honest appraisal of cameras, and that's you're one of the success stories, Carlos. That's what I'm talking about. I want somebody to buy in spite of the drawbacks, you know. And I do still love the XT2. I think the XT2 is a fantastic camera. Just for the money, wasn't right for me at the time, you know. Queen of San Joaquin, you had mentioned that Olympus camera that doesn't have 4K. I know you don't need it for YouTube, but I'm going to shell out a few hundred anyway. Do you think it's worth getting one with 4K? Part of it depends on what you're editing with, and if your editing software is pretty minimal to start out with, your computer is pretty minimal to start out with for YouTube, I would say don't get a camera that shoots 4K. I know that everybody talks about being future-proof and this, that, and the other thing. Like, you know, at this point, I would say don't start out with 4K. Given what I know, you know, given what I know about your computer and your editing, kind of where you are in that standpoint. And this is the same thing I told my friend Rob, who may or may not still be watching here. You know, I was trying to give him advice. He's in sort of a similar kind of just getting started with the YouTube channel. I would say start off with a good camera that shoots good HD, because those cameras are highly underrated, because everybody wants 4K, and then you get 4K and you realize it's nice to have for some things, but unless you're putting your stuff on Vimeo or you're making some kind of a film that's going, you know, elsewhere into the universe, a lot of that is going to be lost on YouTube due to the compression and the way that they handle their video files anyways. So you're better off to just shoot 1080 and simplify your life editing, simplify your data storage, simplify all that stuff, spend less money right out of the gate. Yes, it's kind of nice if you're doing a lot of talking head interview shots where you can crop in at 1080, or you can crop in like whatever it is, the like 4 times crop or 2 times crop without losing resolution if you output into 1080, because 4K is like so much bigger than 1080. 1080 is like this, 4K is like this. So if you're gonna export, you put 4K in and you're going to get 1080 out, you can go from 4K, you know, you can crop in tighter without losing resolution on that, and that can be kind of handy, but it still doesn't really replace a zoom, and it's you know, a zoom lens in most cases. I mean, you can get by with it, can be helpful in some cases, but honestly I would say, yeah, just start with, because let me put it this way. If the difference is you waiting another 3 or 4 months to start shooting and editing while you save up to get 4K versus spending the money now to have that 3 months to be practicing and to be learning and to be shooting in HD, I would say HD all the way. And for most circumstances, knowing what you're going to be doing, and also on YouTube, HD is good. Yeah, Tiff, 100% correct about that too. That if Tiff said, if my stance, if you're not in need of 4K, don't get it, because there will always be upgrades, and the ones you see now will be on sale and affordable soon. Totally accurate. And you know, once you have a little bit more of a feel for editing and what it is like, it's very easy to say, I think I'm going to need this, I think I'm going to need that. But when you actually start doing it, you start to realize that the areas where you feel limited are not necessarily the areas you expected to feel limited, and so the things that you buy may not actually be a camera at all. It may very well be audio equipment, it may very well be like a gimbal or something like that that gives you more portability, and you might not find any limitations in terms of what you want to do versus the resolution that you're shooting. So why pay more for something like that if you're, and especially on YouTube as a platform where, you know, like we've been over, yeah, it's probably not a huge deal. Carlos says, my long-haired Oman Standing Rock XT2 adventure photographer days got me into Fuji, and got you watching endless angry photographer reviews. Well, maybe I should hit him up for a commission then, since his channel is crushing it. But yeah, well, I'm working on growing my hair out again. It's just, I kind of got sidetracked on the beard thing, and so then I was like, well, I got to kind of try to, I started to find the beard thing moderately entertaining, so now I'm like trying to fix my beard, make it nice and stuff, and look a little presentable, because literally out of boredom. But I don't hate it. It's been kind of fun it's like I feel like a different person in some ways. But eventually, yeah, so I'm still working towards getting my hair back out, and hopefully by the time I'm done with nursing school, then I'll have long hair and I'll be fully, you know, I'll look like a real transient again, and I'll be able to get back out on the road and do some fun stuff, maybe even over the summer. Maybe not wait till nursing school is over, because that's going to be a few years. Got some time before that happens. All right, let's see, where are we here? King Uzi says 8K is being used already and the tech is increasing very rapidly. I think 4K will be mainstream in a couple of years. Yes, don't be a culpus. I am a nursing student. I have, yeah, the Movember stash hype. I haven't, I'm not into that at all. Although, I mean, I guess I know Philip Bloom always does that, but I think he's got some connection to it. If there's a way that like growing facial hair because I'm bored could translate into like diabetes awareness, since I have type 1, that would be kind of cool. Yes, I am a nursing student. After like a decade of being a climbing, canyoneering guide, freelance photographer, filmmaker, and kind of entrepreneur, speaker-ish in the world of diabetes, type 1 diabetes specifically, which I've had for 20 years, I decided that it would be a lot less stress if I just worked 3/12s a week and then had free time to do photography for clients that I chose, and or just do photography and stuff on YouTube, and if it makes money, great. If not, that's cool too. And so that's kind of what I've been doing, and right now I'm just finishing up my nursing prereqs, and I'm going to have well, yeah, I got maybe one more semester before I'm going to actually start. I'm going to apply, got to take my TEAS exam, the TEAS exam, and then hopefully apply in the wintertime. So, yeah, discussion about 8K. I mean, I think there has to be, I think there has to be I think it depends on where you're talking about viewing stuff, and that's one of the things that I feel like, and somebody who knows more about engineering maybe can correct me on some of this or fill me in, but here's my thought. Like, everything that happens when you see a new technology, everything at least recently has been, and they may go a different direction with this, because I think it's all a matter of just saying, oh, this is cool to get more people to consume in this format or in this platform, so that people buy technology, so that everybody keeps making money, so they keep changing stuff. But like, everything seems to be mobile, trending towards streaming, towards mobile, get everybody onto mobile. And if everybody is going towards mobile, at least for the foreseeable future, to me it would seem like the 4K HD thing is kind of a moot point there, because the screen is pretty small, and so you're not really going to be seeing a big difference between one or the other. Now, maybe in some sort of like VR or 360 type of thing, the resolution has a different impact there, but that's a whole different ball of wax, I think, at least from my understanding of things, and that's part of the reason why I don't really worry a whole bunch about 4K and 1080. I mean, in a lot of ways, I look at, for my needs, and I don't know anything about gaming. I'll be real upfront about that. But like, I mean, even for me, it feels like the megapixel debate in stills cameras is sort of like what the 4K versus HD debate is for video. A lot of it, especially anything, like, there are a lot of people that shoot 4K. I mean, hell, I've spent a lot of time shooting 4K that looked really poor, when I could have been spending more time really focusing on taking more time to get good lighting and to orient everything and to do a better job composing, and my work would have looked many, many times better at a lower resolution rather than the 4K that it's not a substitute. I'm not saying that anybody is suggesting that it is a substitute to, that the higher resolution of 4K is in any way a substitute, but I mean, I look, for example, at the one of the movies that I feel like is the, oh, I see what you're saying, Tiff. Yeah, gamers are probably the group that are buying 4K TVs and monitors the most. That makes sense. Yeah, that's possible, and I don't know if that's going to bleed over. Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, for different types of work, I think there is a market for it, but I think that the way most people consume entertainment, specifically the way most people consume on YouTube, and Vimeo might be different. I don't know the numbers about how people consume on Vimeo. For me, if I'm watching Vimeo, that means laptop. Partly because of the fact that I don't know what their secret handshake is, but the way they do their video files, they look better, they process them somehow differently, and so, like, Vimeo is a laptop operation, but YouTube, a lot of times I'll watch that just on my phone or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see where that goes. I feel like people have been saying for a while that 4K was like the next thing, and that was the big thing, and now they're already moving to 8K, and 4K still hasn't quite met the projection that everybody was saying, because even back in 2012, 2013 is when everybody really started talking about it. 2014, it was like, oh, this is the thing, this is it, like, everybody's got to get on it, and now we're almost to 2018, And I think there are niches where the 4K has really hit its stride, but I think for the growing niche in terms, because I think this is the other side of things, is that some of the technology from a consumption standpoint is going to be dictated by the type of creation that is happening, which is based on what, you know, people want to make. And YouTube is growing. YouTube is growing very rapidly, I think, because so many people want to create and consume this type of content. And so I think that to that extent, there's still going to be a market for the, you know, less technically robust formats. And again, could be wrong there, but I think that may have, it's an interesting discussion in any case to know where everything is going to go. I can't really see doing much more than 4K for YouTube, and even that, you know, yeah, ADP is still not fully integrated. That's a good point too. You know, like even with these mobile live streams, even using the proper rear facing camera on the phone, you can still only stream in 720, which is kind of irritating because I would really like to be able to do that. You know, just to be able to get up to 1080 on these live stream videos, that would be really superb. But we're not there yet. Anyways, guys, I've really enjoyed this evening chatting with everybody, fielding questions. I would love to hear more questions, comments, all that stuff. If you're not already subscribed to the Living Vertical YouTube channel, please go ahead and subscribe because I'm doing these live streams frequently. I'm editing videos, putting out vlogs, my short narrative pieces as well, kind of the whole gamut of what I do. Everything goes here onto the Living Vertical channel. Would love to have you subscribe, be part of that. If you're thinking about buying any of this gear that we discussed, the Amazon links will be down below after this stream concludes or in any one of my other videos. And those links keep the lights on, keep the cameras running here, and allow me to take the time, as well as my Patreon supporters, many of whom are here. Tiff, Yusuf, I know, are here as well. Even a couple bucks helps continue to do this work, which does take a decent amount of time, and it really enables me to do this stuff. So anyways, I appreciate you guys, the contributions that you all make in the variety of ways, and I look forward to seeing more of you, hearing more from you, questions, all that stuff, all that good stuff, right? So good evening, everybody, and we will see you on the next Adventure Photo Show, and thank you for tuning in here. Good night, everybody.